Have you ever imagined dying, and upon crossing to the other side, discovering that the new pope has already been chosen, and he's not human? Have you ever wondered who really controls the spiritual powers behind the scenes? What if the miracles we're about to witness aren't divine at all, but part of a dark plan to manipulate the very soul of humanity? In today's video, you'll hear the testimony of Daniel Cross, an American paramedic who had a near-death experience and came back with a chilling revelation. The next pope's rise is not guided by God, but by hidden forces. And he saw it all. If you believe the truth still needs to be spoken, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss a single story. And drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from. Your voice helps this warning reach more people. My name is Daniel Cross. I'm 39 years old, American, born and raised in Des Moines, Iowa. My life has never been anything extraordinary. I was just a paramedic, married, 2 kids trying to keep my head above water between night shifts and late bills. I was never very religious. I grew up going to church, of course, like almost everyone here, but faith for me was more of a cultural routine than anything else, until the day my heart stopped and I left my body. It was March 11th, 2025. I was in the middle of my shift, very tired. I had barely slept 2 hours the night before. The call was simple: an elderly man with breathing difficulties. We got into the ambulance. Everything was normal, but as we drove, I felt something strange, a dizziness, an absurd pressure in the chest. I thought it was just tiredness, but it wasn't. I remember looking at my partner's face in the next seat and trying to say, "I think I look bad," but my mouth didn't respond. The next image was the roof of the ambulance spinning, and then nothing, at least for a while. When I realized something again, there was no more body. There was no pain. There was no time. I was floating. But it was more than that. It was as if I were made of air, of light, of memory. Below me, I saw my own body being frantically attended to. One of the nurses was intubating me. Someone shouted, "We lost our pulse." But that no longer concerned me. I was somewhere else. And then, the light. Man, it wasn't an ordinary light. It was alive, pulsating, as if the universe itself breathed in that glow. I was pulled. I didn't walk. I got sucked in, going through something that felt like a tunnel made of everything I'd ever been, everything I'd ever felt. Every mistake, every gesture of love, every silence. Everything flashed before me with such absurd clarity that it hurt. And when that tunnel ended, I was there, in a place I can't describe fairly. It looked like a temple but without walls, an infinite space of energy and consciousness. I didn't see with my eyes. You knew. It was as if the air itself was alive and teaching me. There I was surrounded by presences. They had no defined shape, but were like conscious intelligences, gigantic, made of peace. They didn't speak to me with words, but with vibrations that went straight to my soul. One of them said, "And I will never forget, the time has come. You will see what human eyes could not bear without preparation." It was at that moment that everything began to transform. The place dissolved. Suddenly, I was in a completely different space. It felt like a projection, as if I were watching the world, but from the outside. And I saw the Vatican, St. Peter's Square. The bells are empty, the crowd waiting. And I heard, inside me, "The throne is vacant." The image got closer. I saw flags at half-mast, a funeral, a white coffin, and I understood the Pope had died. But what came next was even more disturbing. I saw the balcony, white smoke rising, the world in ecstasy, shouting, "Habemus Papam." But what appeared on the balcony, he was not an ordinary man. Something inside me screamed, "This is wrong." He looked human, yes, but the eyes, my God, the eyes. They had no soul. They had schedule. as if it were a perfect mask covering something cold, calculating, non-human. And behind him, shadows, figures in dark costumes without faces like gears in a hidden machine. I saw symbols on their clothes, codes, I saw contracts, I saw blood. A voice said to me, "He has already been chosen, not from above, but from the depths. He will bring a false light. He will speak in the name of peace, but he will be the harbinger of eternal silence." I felt a fear my soul had never known, and yet I couldn't turn away. I saw inside the mind of that Pope. I saw that he had been trained since he was young, programmed, and I saw who trained him. They were not priests, they were not monks, they were scientists, military men, occultists. I saw tunnels under Rome. I saw pacts. I saw a church within a church, and then the voice, "You still have time, but not to stop it, just to warn." That's when I started to fall, back, the sky disappearing, the weight coming back, air forced into my lungs as I screamed inside, but I wasn't the same anymore. When I returned to my body, the first sound I heard was a continuous beeping sound, then a muffled voice saying, "We're losing him." And then something pulled me back violently, as if it had fallen from the sky straight into a box that was too tight. My eyes opened. The white ceiling of a hospital, the smell of alcohol, the pain of oxygen entering the tube. I was alive, but it wasn't just me there anymore. You can't explain this with normal words. It was as if my soul had returned carrying a secret too hot to be inside a human body. For the first few days, I couldn't speak. I couldn't even cry. I could only remember the balcony scene, the face of the Pope, the eyes soulless, and that uncomfortable certainty like a splinter in the flesh. That was not human in the sense that we understand it. In the vision, I felt his vibration, a magnetic field that would repel any light spirits. He was not a servant. It was a symbol, an avatar, something implemented, and those around him, I don't even know what to call them. They looked human, but inside they were empty, like shells operating under orders from a collective mind. I saw the smiles on the faces of the crowd below the balcony and realized they didn't see what I saw. That moment was not a coronation. It was the activation of a plan. There, in that spiritual place, while the images still invaded me, the beings of light showed me a map, but it was not geographic. It was a power map. Dots shone in the world, one in London, another in Dubai, an immense one under Rome, a pulsation in the United States which seemed to grow every second. And at the center of it, a network, invisible but alive, an energetic web manipulating events, each point connected by decisions made in absolute secrecy. The voice returned. They no longer need to hide. The last seal was broken with the elder's death. At the time, I didn't understand, but then I realized the old man was the previous Pope Francisco. With his death, something has been unlocked, a spiritual barrier, a limit that now no longer existed. I saw a book closing, a new one opening, but the new book was written in dark symbols, in codes of domination and seduction. I saw the new Pope speaking to the UN, the press, the whole world. He used words like universal peace, interreligious unity, new spiritual language. I saw ecstatic crowds. I saw other religions bowing. Muslim leaders, Hindus, rabbis, all on the same stage, applauding. And behind the curtains, the same faces I saw in the shadows, bankers, generals, CEOs. The illusion was perfect. A new religion was being founded before the eyes of the world. Except they didn't say it was a religion. They called it global consciousness, fluid faith, enlightened humanism. I saw a new temple being built, not a church, but a neural center, equipment, screens, algorithms. A cult of conscience but without God. A cult of the collective but without a soul. And I felt with every fiber of my spirit, this new Pope. He is not a spiritual leader. He is the Trojan horse. At that moment, I asked the beings of light with a desperate heart, "Why are you showing me this? What can I do about all this?" And the answer was direct. "You saw it because there are millions who won't see it, but they will hear it. Someone needs to say what's coming." It was then that I realized my ordinary life, my work as a first responder, my family, all of this now had a new layer. I wasn't saved by luck. I was sent back with a mission. I was not a special chosen one. I was just someone who agreed to see the truth. And the truth, man, it hurts. But it's like an injection. If you can handle the pain, it can save your soul. In the days following my recovery, everything seemed denser. The news, the headlines, the speeches. A pattern began to emerge. A narrative pushed harder. A tired world asking for a guide. And the stage was ready. The main actor, chosen, but the script was written in the underworld. I no longer slept properly. It wasn't ordinary insomnia. It was as if when I closed my eyes, something was waiting for me. A presence, not evil, but vigilant. As if the heavens themselves were asking me night after night, "Do you understand what you saw?" I returned to work about 2 weeks after my cardiac arrest. But inside, I was a wreck. I answered calls, applied first aid, followed the protocol. But my mind kept returning to that image, the balcony, the white smoke, the world celebrating, and that empty look from the new pope, so human and so false. It consumed me. And then the worst came, the confirmations. On April 2nd, I read the headline that set off an alarm deep in my soul. Pope Francis dies at 88. Vatican prepares for conclave. That was it. The future was already becoming the present. I felt my blood run cold. I ran to the bathroom at the emergency station, locked the door, and vomited. My body knew. That date was the beginning of something much bigger. That same night I dreamed again. But it wasn't just any dream. It was a return. This time there was no library, no angels around me. There was only one dark space with a line of fire cutting through everything like a tear in the universe. And along these lines, as if they were three-dimensional projections, scenes appeared. Visions, fragments of what was to come. I saw the new pope already enthroned, speaking in several languages, with a supernatural fluidity. But behind the words, there were an anesthetic vibration, like a technological siren song, something that intoxicated the soul, that erased spiritual discernment, a false peace. I saw millions kneeling, but his eyes were erased, as if they had lost their shine. The light of human consciousness was being absorbed, sucked. I saw schools adopting a new global catechesis, children learning that all religions are just expressions of energy, that God is just an archetypal concept. I saw crucifixes being removed and replaced with a new symbol, an eye with a digital halo, as if it were the union between spirituality and artificial intelligence. And then a voice said to me, "They started with the mind, now they come with the soul." And then I understood something even more disturbing. This plan has not started now. It has been woven for decades, maybe centuries, but only now has it reached enough maturity to manifest itself without resistance. They studied our weaknesses. They created chaos, divisions, collective fatigue. They fueled wars, fears, crises of faith, and now with the world exhausted, they offer the cure, a global guide, gentle, welcoming, and absolutely in control. A false Christ. The most difficult scene I saw that night was a church in the United States. It was huge. It looked like a convention center. A crowd watched the new pope in a hologram projected in giant size. He said, "Faith needs to evolve. The time has come to abandon dogmas. God is in everyone, and therefore no one needs salvation." And the crowd applauded. That's When I understood the plan was not to replace faith, it was reprogramming it. And the Pope, who should have been a pastor, became an engineer of souls. Within that vision, time seemed suspended. There were no clocks. There was no breathing, just awareness. And she showed me more. After the pronouncement of that new leader, the false Pope, I was led by an invisible force to an even deeper dimension. It was as if I were going through layers of reality, as if my soul was being taken through tunnels made of sound, images, and truth. One of the beings of light, who until then had only been observing, approached, didn't walk. He came to me without movement, like a thought that decides to appear. And he said, silently but clearly, "Don't just look with your eyes. Feel the source. What looks like light doesn't always come from light." That's when everything changed. As the scene of the Vatican disappeared, and before me an underground chamber appeared. I know it was underground, although there were no walls or stairs. The air there was thick, dark, but not empty. It was a place of decisions. I saw men in suits, women in veils, all sitting around a circular table with symbols that I didn't recognize. But that caused me instinctive repulsion. They didn't argue. They decided. In front of each of them was a screen made of living fog, showing faces, numbers, countries. But in the center of the table, there was a presence. And she was not human. It had no defined shape, but was perceptible as a shadow, with its own consciousness. Something that fed on what was not said, of hidden intentions, of concessions made in the dark. And then came the harshest revelation. They had already chosen the next pope. He wasn't just any cardinal. It was someone created, designed, a hybrid between political influence, spiritual manipulation, and emotional engineering. I saw images from his childhood, raised in religious environments, but with access to advanced technologies, instructed not by priests but by indoctrinators of the new faith. I saw tests, conditionings. I saw how his memories had been edited, his consciousness shaped. And then I understood. He didn't believe he was evil. He believed he was the savior. That was the genius of the plan. He didn't know it was a play. He thought it was the board itself. Everything about him, the sweet words, the theatrical gestures, the love for the masses, was genuine. But he wasn't free. It was programmed. That's when the presence in the center of the table turned to me. I was not part of that meeting. I was a spiritual interloper. And even so, she saw me. That was the most terrifying moment of my entire out-of-body experience. There were no eyes on the thing, but it realized. And at that moment, the entire space was filled with a serious, deafening sound, as if the universe itself was grinding its teeth. And then the voice, not of the beings of light, but of that, spoke directly to my soul. You shouldn't be here. I felt my essence being pulled, as if they wanted to erase me. And that was when the beings of light manifested themselves again, around me. One of them positioned himself between me and the presence, and he said, with authority, as calm as it was immense, "He came to see. He is under the seal of truth." And everything broke. I was taken back to that previous dimension, calmer, cleaner, where the vibration was bearable again. I was shaking. Even as a spirit, it trembled. I felt a weight that wasn't physical. It was a burden to know, of having seen what should never have been shown to anyone still alive. Then, another being approached. Its light was soft, like that of an evening that soothes the soul. He involved me and said, "You have seen the mask. Now you will see the spirit." And then, behind the new pope, in that frozen image of St. Peter's balcony, something revealed itself, as if the light around his body flickered for a second. And in that flicker, I saw the entity that inhabited it. It was no ordinary possession. It was a subtle fusion between entity and consciousness, an ancient spirit, infinite patience, intelligence that bordered on the divine, but without love, no heat, no soul. It was as if the most accurate spiritual machine ever created had taken over the pulpit of faith, and the final sentence of that stage of the vision went through me like a sword. When the world acclaims the one who unifies all beliefs, he will have already unified the doors of the soul, and whoever opens it will no longer close alone. At that point, I started to want to go back. Not because I was afraid of what I saw, but because my spirit felt that it had reached the limit of what it could bear. The truth hurts, but she also wakes up. Still within that out-of-body state, where things are not dreamed but experienced with the clarity of lightning cutting across the sky, I felt something change. It was as if the spiritual environment around me had gone silent. Even the light beings themselves seemed to have taken a step back, as if what came next required me to be alone with that. And then the illusion began. I saw the world, but not the world as it is, but as it will be presented. An improved version of reality, constructed with surgical perfection. The newly chosen pope, the one I already knew was inhabited by something that wasn't human, appeared smiling alongside children of all races. There were hearts on the screens, flags waving, an interfaith choir singing about brotherhood. It was the ideal scene. Unquestionable. A divine propaganda. And in the background, a melody was playing that I had never heard, but that stirred something very old inside me. It almost made me cry. It almost made me believe it. Almost. But that's when the spiritual truth asserted itself. As if someone had torn the screen of this reality with their own hands. Everything froze. The music stopped. And I saw from behind. I saw that every detail of that enchanting image was supported by chains. Invisible chains made of emotional manipulation, psychological wear, and subtle doctrine. I saw that the new spiritual leader was not an ordinary deceiver. He was the culmination of a multidimensional effort to manufacture the ideal faith to imprison souls. That new religion he would lead, not called religion of course, but global consciousness, had a single goal: seal human hearts with the illusion of completeness. People would not be forced to follow him. They would go out of love. But it was a manipulated love, a love based on the fear of being left out. In my vision, I saw how the new pope would begin to talk about the unification of spiritual truths, how he would promote the end of oppressive dogmas, and how millions, perhaps billions, would say, finally, a modern leader. I saw how entire religions would begin to buckle, not from coercion but from exhaustion. A collective tiredness of division, of war, of pain, and he would come as a cure. But the voice of one of the light beings interrupted the vision. Every false cure begins with a perfect diagnosis. And at that moment I saw something even more disturbing: the stamps. People by the millions received a mark on their spiritual bodies, a vibrational seal. He wasn't physical, it was more subtle than matter. But once placed, it changed the soul frequency. Whoever received it lost the natural impulse to seek the truth. He accepted everything that came from that pope as if it were pure light. I saw pastors, priests, gurus, all being branded. I saw artists, teachers, even scientists. I saw a new ethic being constructed, and anyone who didn't bow to it was labeled divisive, fundamentalist, love-resistant. The world was going to start to divide, but not into good and bad, not in believers and atheists. It would be divided between those who feel and those who follow. And then came the harshest revelation. The Baha'i entity that inhabits the new pope, the one that was not human, was not there just to deceive. She was there to prepare the throne of something even greater. And at that moment, I felt the ground of vision shake. Everything went dark, and a symbol appeared before me, a burning eye inside an inverted crown of thorns. I felt my soul almost dissolve. The closest being of light intervened, enveloped me with his vibrational field and said, "You saw the seal. Now you carry the weight of knowing. But the truth is not a burden, it is a calling." And everything disappeared. All. I was left in an Absolute void, but with a certainty that was not mine. The certainty that the greatest spiritual deception in human history had already begun. After I saw the seal, not the physical one, but the one imprinted on the frequency of souls, I felt like my consciousness was being sucked into a new space. But this time I was not guided. I was played. It was like falling into a well made of silence. Everything around me was dark, but not empty. It was a dark intelligent, as if watching me. Little by little, small points of light began to flicker in the distance, like fireflies in eternity. They came in pairs, trios, then dozens, until I realized they were people, souls. Each of them seemed to float inside an energetic capsule, a vibrational bubble made of their own memories, choices, pains, and beliefs. And somehow I understood everything about each one just by getting closer. Not with logic, but with emotional clarity. It was as if the heart read the soul. And then I saw what shocked me most. The bubbles were being reissued, not destroyed. Edited, lights being turned off, specific moments being silenced, internal questions being erased from the human desire to ask. It was as if someone, or something, was silently altering the fabric of what makes a human being. Seek the truth. Self-love was being replaced by self-idolatry, spirituality, by self-expression without transcendence, faith, for obedience to a collective formatted ideal. It was all subtle but precise, like surgery performed while the soul is still asleep. I then saw that some souls were resisting. There was light, pulsing chaotically, trying to break up the bubbles. These were pursued by shadowy shapes. They didn't attack, but they involved. They seduced. They promised peace, acceptance, purpose. One of those souls, and this I will never forget, it was that of a child. She struggled to keep a memory alive, a simple image, her grandmother praying with her, but the memory was fading like smoke as a new voice told him. That was beautiful, but it's over. Now you have a new mission, to be like everyone else. At that moment, something in me screamed. He screamed as if he still had a voice, and I was pulled up brutally, as if the spiritual dimension itself had detected that I shouldn't have been seeing that. Everything went white for a second, a white so pure it hurt, and when the light went down, I was back in Living Library, but it wasn't the same as before. It was dark, not out of malice, but out of grief. It was as if that space which once vibrated with wisdom and light was now sick. Some of the hallways were unlit. Some records, yes, I know this is weird, were blank. I asked the beings of light with my mind in pure despair, "What's going on? Why is the library erasing parts of itself?" And the answer was a whisper that cut through everything. Because souls are forgetting to write. The revelation fell on me like an avalanche. The new religion, the new pope, the new language of unity. All of this was part of a plan to prevent human beings from continuing their deepest mission. Record your journey with your own consciousness. The library, living divine, is only complete with the free choices of souls. But now, millions, were delegating your choices, trusting blindly, handing over internal command to an external authority. And that authority was that perfect mask. The new pope, with his sweet speech, his peaceful appearance, his programmed intelligence, was not just leading the church. He was reprogramming the collective soul of humanity. And when the last soul accepts the seal, the last candle in the library will go out. It was then that one of the beings of light touched my spiritual center, and he said, in a voice that sounded like a forgotten memory, "You carry the last key, the living record. What you saw is not to condemn, it is to remember. Write it down." And I knew with all the strength of my soul, real faith is being erased from human consciousness. But there's still time to record what we saw, still immersed in that space outside. of time and flesh after the revelation of the library being silenced by human choices themselves, I was led to a new vision. But this time, she started with something beautiful, almost divine. I saw a crowd in prayer. The new pope was in the IBU center laying hands on a sick young man who was getting up from his wheelchair in tears. People screamed, praised, cried. There was soft music, the sky seemed clearer, even the wind seemed to respond to the moment. A miracle, or at least, that's what it seemed like at first. The scene was chilling. It was impossible not to get emotional. I myself there, in a state of mind, felt my being tremble at the image of that boy walking, smiling, hugging his mother. I saw skeptics kneeling. I saw reporters crying. "He's the man of God. He's proof that God is among us again," said someone. But then I felt uncomfortable, a crack in the perfection of the scene, as if for a second I saw the seam behind the curtain. And she was rotten. The light that surrounded the new pope, it didn't come from above. She was born from a circle below him, a hidden seal, designed with ancient symbols that pulsed in dark red. It was a very advanced spiritual technology, something between alchemy and vibrational artificial intelligence, a creation that blended ancient magic with occult energetic science. The voice of one of the beings of light whispered to me, "Not everything that heals comes from light. Not every miracle is divine. Beware the power that seduces before it sets free." Right away I understood. The new leader would not wage war on the faith. He would use her. Miracles, signs, phenomena, all planned, controlled to provoke global commotion, to seduce not only the faithful, but the skeptics, to convert through aesthetics, through emotion, through the engineering of hope. I saw this repeating itself in various parts of the world. People claiming to have been cured by touching the Pope's hologram. Electronic devices recording inexplicable phenomena during their speeches. Appearances of lights in the sky synchronized with your events. Voices in dreams saying, "The new faith has arrived." But that it was not faith, era spiritual emotional conditioning. The true miracle, the beings of light told me, it doesn't just change the body, it frees the heart from fear. What I was seeing, it only fueled the fear of being left out. The new pope used words like love and unity, but his energy field projected conformity, servitude, control disguised as elevation, and then came another brutal revelation. I saw the global broadcasts of these miracles being followed by emotional tracking systems, artificial spiritual satellites, equipment that measures human vibrational reactions in real time. They knew who believed, who doubted, who resisted. Each reaction was stored, and a new, deeper voice spoke inside me. It's not just a new religion, it's a new spiritual nervous system for humanity. People would be integrated little by little into what they called the Unified Consciousness Network. But what they were really creating was a grid, a vibrational prison, an invisible prison made of good intentions imposed. And there, surrounded by it all, I cried, even without a body. Because I realized the final deception will not be dark, it will be luminous, and he will come dressed as a miracle. One of the beings of light then approached with eyes, not physical but piercing me from within, and said, "You have seen the brightness that lies. Now you will see the light that resists." And for the first time since my heart stopped in that ambulance, I felt hope again. But she was coming from a place I didn't yet understand. After seeing the controlled use of faith to seduce the world, designed, miracles-induced healing, spiritually engineered smiles, I felt myself sinking. My soul trembled. It was as if the very fabric of reality was being redesigned by hands that pretended to be of light. But then, something broke the silence. A point of light flickered on the periphery of my perception. Small, fragile, but real. I looked at him and the space around me began to transform. The scene of the Vatican and the miracles faded away, as if it had never existed, and I found myself in front of another network, much smaller. Hide, but live. It was a group of people, small, spread, no apparent connection to each other, each of them in a corner of the world. A woman praying alone in a basement in Poland, an old indigenous man lighting a fire in silence in Peru, a silent child looking at the sky in a Congo slum, a scientist in a US laboratory muttering a prayer before beginning an experiment. They didn't know each other, they didn't communicate, but they vibrated the same. And that was a problem for the new Pope's plan. The voice of the being of light explained to me, these are the unmapped ones, the ones invisible to the network. They do not bow down because they feel the truth in the silence, not in the speeches. And then I saw how the system surrounding the new spiritual leader tried to reach them, but it failed, because they did not respond to common stimuli. They were not looking for healing, nor acceptance. They didn't want a perfect world, they wanted true, and that search made them dangerous. I then saw that the real resistance to the plan would not come from major religious leaders, nor from institutions. It would come from anonymous, of ordinary people who wouldn't give up their inner spark for a promise of collective harmony. These small spots of light began to grow, not in number, but in density. Each of them shone brighter than 1,000 programmed souls. And around them, the living library began to rewrite previously erased corridors. The free choices of these souls rekindled spiritual records. It was as if, when they said no to the seduction of the false miracle, they were writing again with divine ink. One of the beings of light then touched me, and in that touch, I saw something even deeper. These people did not resist out of pride. They resisted because they had known the true presence, the one who doesn't need a stage, who speaks in silence, who comforts without applause. They had had little experiences of consciousness throughout their lives, touches, intuitions, sacred moments, and these moments made them immune to the spectacle. And then I heard, real consciousness does not compete. It reveals itself. I saw that many of these awakened people would be seen as sick, fanatical, crazy. Some would be silenced, others ignored. But it didn't matter, because they didn't need a stage. They just needed inner fidelity. And then the final image of this part of the vision came to me. A candle, lonely, flickering in the dark. Fragile, yes, but live. All around her, darkness tried to suffocate her, but she resisted. And from inside the flame, a voice came out. You are also a candle, and you will come back to light others. It was then that I understood something that cut me to the core. The dark plan is not afraid of war. The dark plan is afraid of awakened individual. Because he doesn't need to convince, just exist. And it was that moment that rekindled my strength, right there, in the space of consciousness. Still didn't know how or when, but I knew I would go back. After the beings of light showed me the resistors, those isolated souls who, even far from everything, kept a secret flame burning, I was taken to one last spiritual chamber. But unlike the previous ones, this one was not made of images or visions. It was made of intention. It was like being inside a question. And the question was simple, direct, and cutting. Will you have the courage to remember? Don't respond, to remember. It was then that I understood that the biggest challenge for anyone who returns with a truth like this, it's not about surviving what you saw. It's about living with the silence of someone you'll never see. There, in that space made of pure vibration, I realized what the beings of light themselves could not do. They could show, guide, protect, but they could not interfere with free will. The lie, however sophisticated, only takes hold because is accepted. And the truth, however divine, only manifests itself when is desired. And then, one last vision was granted to me. I saw the future very close. Months, perhaps weeks after the enthronement of the new pope. I saw people waking up. Yes, some. But I also saw others turning against anyone who dared to question them. I saw families falling apart, friends moving away, churches being reshaped, in the name of global unity. And the cruelest, I saw people who had felt the call, but retreated. Out of fear, for convenience, because they don't want to lose their place in the world. The vision then focused on a figure, myself. I was sitting in a dark room surrounded by papers, shaking with a pen in my hand, and the voice returned, now coming from inside me. You will write, but you will pay the price. It was then that one of the light entities approached with something that looked like a fragment of living crystal. She placed it on my spiritual chest, and a wave of memory went through me. I saw my entire life, from childhood to the moment of death, as a single bundle of decisions. And there, at that point outside of time, I saw the promise I had made before I was born. I had asked to remember, and even more, he had asked to be the bridge. That was why I was pulled back from the threshold. That's why they let me see what many don't see. Why I accepted, before incarnating, the risk of returning with my eyes open. The voice of conscience, which was not a being, but the source itself, enveloped me in an indescribable presence, and said, Peter, you are not special, you are necessary, and that is enough. You won't come back with all the answers, you'll come back with the right seed of doubt. Right doubt. I had never thought about that, but I understood. What wakes the soul is not a sermon. It is a courageous doubt. The world is full of imposed certainties, but what's missing is someone to say, what if this is all theater? What if the light we follow isn't true? This question is a match, and a ready soul is silent gunpowder. It was then that the final scene of this stage was revealed. I saw millions looking up at St. Peter's balcony, waiting for the new pope to appear, and in the midst of the crowd, small lights came on, one by one. People who didn't applaud, that they don't smile, they didn't cry with emotion, they just looked and felt. These were the seeds, those that were yet to germinate, and my role was to be the spark that would touch them when I returned. The being of light then leaned towards me and for the last time said, when you awaken in the body, everything will seem like a dream, but when you write, everything will come back. Don't speak to convince, speak to remember. And then a force pulled me violently. The library, the angels, the lights, everything began to disintegrate. The last image was a mirror, and in the mirror, my own eyes looking back at me. That's when I knew. It was time to go back. The return wasn't like falling, it was like being forced through a tunnel too narrow for my soul. Each layer of consciousness that I had touched said goodbye with a weight that could not be measured in words. I was being pushed against my will back to the place that no longer served me well, the body. I felt my chest first, as if a ton of concrete had been placed on it, then the throat burning with a tube, the distant sound of appliances, running voices, a woman crying, an insistent beep trying to pull me into something I no longer wanted. But what hurt me most was the look on the doctor's face when I opened my eyes. He came back. As if I were a miracle. But it wasn't. I was a witness who could no longer feign blindness. For the first 48 hours, I didn't say anything. Not by choice, I couldn't. My mind was still leaf. I heard echoes. I felt presences. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw flashes of the library, the seal, the balcony. And inside me, that certainty. Everything was real. And it was coming. But this topic is not about the world around me. It's about what happened to me after I returned. It wasn't an adaptation. It was a cooked. I fight for lost ignorance. I struggle to know what others won't see. I fight because, no matter how much I talk, write, scream, most won't believe it. And still, I need to talk. Coming back on the other side carrying this kind of revelation is not like waking up from a beautiful spiritual dream. It's like being reborn on fire. I feel an urgency that borders on desperation. It's not hysteria. and prophetic weight. As if I had a torch lit in a world of dry wood, and the entire structure was screaming not to be set on fire. But the fire didn't come from me. It came from consciousness. And she said to me, "You promised." I didn't come back to convince. I went back to planting doubt where deception is absolute. Because as I saw in that last moment, the plan that is being formed is so perfect, so brilliant, so well stitched, that it can only be fought with something that cannot be simulated: living testimony. Since I returned, I have not been able to look at the image of the new Pope, who now presents himself to the world as the guide of the new time, without feeling the distorted vibration that I saw on that other side. It's a hypnosis vibe of spiritual theater. He smiles, but his eyes remain hollow, and behind him I see the same faces. Business people, rulers, technocrats, all under the same command disguised as revelation. And that's why I write, and I record, and I speak, because I know there are others like me, others who saw it, others who may not have words yet but have the same anguish burning inside, the same shiver when hearing the speech of the false light, the same discomfort when seeing faith become a mass product. I went back, and with my return, I brought the fire of silence. That presence that I met in consciousness accompanies me, not as a voice, but as a living memory. She told me, "The theater has already begun, but whoever remembers the true plot will not be fooled." So here I am. I saw. I died. I crossed. And now, I'm here to tell anyone who will listen. When the new Pope speaks on behalf of all religions, when he says that love doesn't need truth, when miracles start to come too easy, remember this story. And if something inside you trembles, even if slightly, know that this is your soul saying, "I remember it too." If you like this beautiful spiritual testimony, leave a like, comment on your impressions, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to activate the notification bell to watch each new video and help us spread this message to a greater number of people. Until next time.